Hi, everyone, and welcome to Word to Us, a podcast by a Black first-gen female student for Black first-gen female students. My name is Kyla-Journey, and I'll be your host for this limited series talking about the taboo topics within the Black community. Now, just because I created this podcast for Black first-gen female students doesn't mean they're the only ones that can listen to this podcast. The topics I plan on covering with this series can apply to any and everyone. I know what it's like to look for a community that caters to the intersection of my identities, and I'd like to carve out a space catered to Black women created by one. Trust me, if you've been through it, there's a chance someone else has too. Hi everybody, today we are going to be talking about boundaries. When I say boundaries, I mean boundaries with friends, boundaries with people that you're dating or seeing, family members, anyone that you have an interpersonal relationship with. Boundaries are something that are bound to come up, no pun intended, and there are things that are important to keep yourself emotionally well and to keep those around you emotionally well. My personal journey with boundaries is something that I came to terms with more as I got into college and realized that if you're not seeing the same people 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, you have class with them, you see them in the hallway, you might take the same form of transportation to get to and from school. Shifting the parallel between that and college, where the school is so much bigger, classes are bigger, you're taking classes with people across different colleges and majors. So coming to college really clarified what it means to have boundaries with someone, and also just understanding the level of commitment that you and the person are willing to put into your friendship, your relationship, or just your platonic relationship as well. I think the most important thing when thinking about boundaries is to think about two things: having an open line of communication with the other person and making sure that it's a two-way street. You're not only communicating with that person and you're expecting them to listen, but they're also communicating with you and you're listening to what they have to say as well. The other thought that I have is it's okay to say no. And there's always an extent to this, obviously. If you're the friend that is constantly saying no and you constantly don't want to do things for anyone or with anyone, that's obviously different than just saying no because you just don't have the capacity to do the tasks that those around you are asking you to do. The other thing I want to highlight about having an open line of communication is once you've communicated your personal boundary to the other person and you've made it clear that that's what your boundary is, sticking to that as well. Obviously, you can change. You can have things that happen to you that may cause you to adjust what your boundary is with this person, but for the most part, you also have to give them grace and give them time to adjust to this new boundary if it's something that wasn't already pre-established. As always, I think it's pretty important to also realize when someone is abusing your time or abusing the fact that you're giving them chances to redeem themselves with your boundaries. I don't think there's a specific cutoff time. I think it gets to a point where you're realizing that their behavior isn't changing and they're apologizing, but there's nothing that's shifting. And my best friend, she's one of the wisest people I know, and she said that apologizing without changed behavior is manipulation, and I swear by that up and down when it comes to anyone in my life. If I bring an issue, and issue is a strong word, but if I bring something of concern to my best friend or anyone in my life, and they're like, yes, I hear you, I understand you, I apologize for my actions making you feel that way, and I'll do better. If they're saying that, but there's no shift in their behavior and they're continuously apologizing, they're manipulating you into thinking that they're going to change, and they truly never will. And that can turn into a form of emotional abuse. And emotional abuse doesn't have to be something only perpetrated by significant others. It can also be perpetrated by friends. I think another important thing to think about is how do you set boundaries while still remaining a vulnerable person in the relationships and friendships that you want to keep that level of vulnerability and intimacy. When I think about the relationships that I have with people in my life currently that are vulnerable, that are intimate, where we share details that we might not share with anyone else in our lives, I know for a fact that I am confident in that person's ability to understand where I'm coming from, to hear me out, to never make me feel less than or to make me feel bad for having maybe just any sort of thought that might have ill wishes towards someone because of something that they've done to me. They understand that I'm human. And I would say, for the most part, when I think about these relationships, there are also places where I know where I stand with the person. I know if it came down to a situation where it was me versus them, or me or them, we wouldn't be able to choose because we would choose each other, if that makes sense. So knowing where you stand with people that you do have intimate and vulnerable relationships with is very, very important. And sometimes it establishes over time, and other times it's established right as soon as you start the friendship. It really depends on the person, and it depends on how quickly you go deeper into who you are as a person with them. I think another thing that's really important about boundaries is figuring out how you want to navigate establishing them with friends, family members, and significant others. For the most part, everyone that's listening to this podcast will be probably anywhere between early 20s, late teens, maybe even mid to upper 20s. And I feel that as you get older and you go into more friendships and relationships that may start on a professional level, transitioning from professional to personal is often a time when having conversations about boundaries is really important. For myself, I talked to my parents after my sophomore spring semester. It wasn't even sophomore spring. I'm sorry. It was my sophomore fall semester. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit down. I'm going to talk to my parents about who I am now that I'm 20, now that I'm going into my second year of college, now that I'm in a relationship, now that I'm in a long-term relationship, and I see myself getting more serious with this person in the future, if that's also what they want. And being able to sit across from my parents and have them listen to me and hear my perspectives and hear what I had to say, especially tying in the effects of therapy and tying in what Lisa's been talking to me about and things that Lisa's been helping me sort of develop an understanding of why I am the way that I am, and explaining that to my parents was really, really important. That was also a really hard conversation to have, because as someone who still lives at home when I'm not at school, I was like, how is this going to change how I maneuver around my parents when I'm home? And honestly, it hasn't. It hasn't affected it negatively. If anything, it's made it more positive. I would say some days it's like I have older roommates, and other times it's more like I'm having a personal one-on-one with my parents. But for the most part, that was one of the best things that came out of having a boundary conversation, because now I know where I stand with my parents, and I know that they know where I'm at mentally, and they've seen how I've matured throughout my college experience. Another thing that I learned during that boundary setting conversation with my parents wasn't just about boundary setting. It was also about self-advocating. And I learned that it's not disrespectful to say what you need and to attempt to communicate that effectively to the person you want to establish boundaries with. I feel that as a young Black woman having a strong relationship with her mother and her father, it's oftentimes considered rude or even disrespectful to quote unquote talk back to your elders. But this wasn't a talk back, it was talk to, and definitely not talk at. I told my parents at the beginning, I was like, I have a lot of things I want to get through, so I'm looking at notes, but if at any point you have any questions, please ask me, but also make sure you're letting me finish my thought so that you can hear my complete opinion before you ask me any questions regarding this conversation that we're having. I believe it's also okay to have different friends for different things. Personally, I think the closest people to me I can count on one hand. And these are the people that know the most intricate, intimate, and personal details about my life. These people that I can count on one hand, not all of them know the same things, and some of them know more than others, but all of them are close to me, and I would consider them the person I would call first in times of crisis. Continuing with the topic of boundaries, another question I want us to think about is, how do you navigate establishing boundaries with friends, with family members, and with significant others? For myself, I feel that with my friends, it's taken me a lot of time to get to the point where I am now, where I'm comfortable with saying no or feeling like I'm quote unquote changing my mind last minute just because my energy levels for the day that we made plans seem not to align with, the things that I was supposed to be doing with my friends. But I would say, even my mom said this when I was younger, but she said that my friendships and the people who I consider my friends in my circle, as she likes to call them, have always been really important to me. And her and my dad, she was like, once I hit middle school, the importance of parents versus friends swapped. So it was my friends now came first, and then my parents came second when it came to talking about things that were important to me, or talking about issues that were going on, or just talking about drama in general and things that are going on in my life. I would say now that I'm a little bit older, I'm definitely more intentional with the information that I share with people and just the time that I spend around specific people. But I would say establishing boundaries really just comes to sitting down with the person. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be a sit-down conversation. It can simply just be a simple question of, are there any things that you're not comfortable talking about with me yet, or is there a specific area or a specific topic that you want me to keep away from, or is there anything I should know about you that makes you feel relatively sensitive? Not to make the person feel belittled by their feelings, but just so you know what to and what not to say. But I feel like, again, that also comes with a little bit of caution, because sometimes asking people these questions early on can lead them to think that what you're looking for in the relationship might be more than what they initially thought the friendship was going to be, especially if you're just meeting this person for the first time and you're just establishing a friendship. Sometimes that blurred line between friendships and relationships can be very, very blurry, in fact, invisible when you first befriend someone. So it's just tiptoeing that line and understanding where you can ask these questions and where you just sort of pick and choose and understand the specific aspects of the person as they share themselves with you. For myself, and in terms of establishing boundaries with family members, I would say my distant family isn't so much of a concern, whereas my direct family, so my mom, my dad, and my 2 sisters, establishing boundaries with them didn't feel too difficult when it comes to my sisters. Now, when it comes to my parents, that's a little bit of a different conversation. But when it came to my sisters, I didn't get a phone until I was 16. And my sisters weren't in the house consistently after they turned 15, and our age gap is 13 years and 10 years. So communicating with my sisters was primarily through my mom. So when it came time for me to get my own phone and the stipulations that came with me having my own device, once I was able to have access to it full-time 24/7, like I was able to bring it into my room and I was able to have it in the house, outside the house, things of that nature. Once I crossed that line, it was establishing how much time I spent on my phone not talking to my siblings and not answering my siblings' calls and texts versus calling my siblings, texting my siblings, checking in on both my sisters. And I remember having a conversation with my older sister, and she was like, I understand that, having your phone all the time is a thing, but it does make me feel some type of way that you're not reaching out first, or you're not taking initiative, to communicate, because the phone does in fact work both ways. Now, this is a rephrase. The conversation was so long ago, I don't remember what she said specifically, but I remember a specific point was the phone works both ways. And with that being said, that means that both sides and both parties have power in how much and how often you communicate. And with knowing that, and with knowing the level of openness that I have with both of my siblings, it's understanding that and then continuing to move forward in our relationship, in our siblinghood, and just understanding what things we want to share, what things we don't want to share, and just sensitive topics that we want to bring to one another that we might not want to bring up to our parents yet, or things that we want to work through with each other before we bring it up to our parents. In terms of establishing boundaries with my parents, this is still something I'm battling currently as a 20-year-old, as a young Black woman in college, as someone who is not living at home primarily anymore. When I go home, I feel that sometimes I sort of revert back to a younger version of myself, the young teenage version of myself, and the version of myself that wasn't comfortable with self-advocating. And I would say even now, there are certain moments when I'm not sure what would be considered self-advocating and what would be considered disrespect, but it really just comes down to being honest with yourself, making sure you maintain a level tone, or this is how I do it anyway, but approaching my parents and letting them know I want to talk about a specific thing, or I want to talk about something that's bothering me, so they can go into it with an open mind and understanding that their child has something that they want to bring up to the both of them, and that they would like to, change the perspective that their parents may have on one specific thing that their child is bringing up to them. And this is just another side note, not just about family members and friends, but just the people you have in your life in general. They're not only there to support you, you're also there to support them as well. And like communication going two ways, support also goes two ways. And in my mind, I feel that everyone is assigned a role, and over time, roles can change, they can grow, they can shrink. You can assign someone a role with certain responsibilities in the beginning, and then later on you realize maybe these responsibilities aren't something I'm comfortable with this person having, because their traits or the way that they're handling these things isn't making me comfortable, but I know this other person who I gave this specific role can tackle this well. So just shifting those internal roles and understanding that with yourself will also help you set an expectation and an understanding of how everyone is playing a role in your support system. And lastly, in terms of establishing boundaries with significant others, personally, I am in a committed relationship. I've been with my partner for almost 2 years, if I can do math, but we've known each other for almost 8 years as of now. So thinking about what we tell each other and what we don't tell each other, we know, I wouldn't say everything about one another, but maybe like 86% of anything that's happened in our lives ever, we have told each other. But it takes a level of vulnerability and a level of intimacy and connectedness with your significant other to know what you want to share and what you don't feel comfortable sharing, and then also understanding their boundaries as well. I know for myself, sometimes I'm just like, you know what, this is extra information that I didn't feel was necessary to share. I understand that you feel comfortable sharing this with me, but sometimes there are certain things I feel would be better off unsaid. And I feel this way especially when it comes to a comment or a thing that someone has said, and it may be about me or pertaining to me, and I wasn't there to defend myself, and my partner or my significant other or whomever it is that would be quote unquote defending me in the situation didn't approach it the way that I would have. These are situations when I'd rather not know, because it's like I wasn't there to speak up for myself, and I know that you were there on my behalf, but this is just a situation I wouldn't have known about if you hadn't told me, so I just prefer if you kept it to yourself. This doesn't have to do with my partner. This just has to do with being that close to someone relationship-wise in general. And I feel like the same goes for my best friend. My best friend I've known since, 2017, but recently within our senior year of high school going into now, that's when we really, really got close. Like, college genuinely brought us together, and I'm so thankful for her. But in terms of our relationship and what we tell each other, I would say my partner and my best friend are the two people who know the most about me right now. And I would say right up under that, and if not right up under, there's like a little bit of a gap, then under that would be my closest cousin on my dad's side and her fiance. Oh, actually, they got married. So her husband, because the both of them, I speak to both of them like they're my cousins. Obviously, they're not cousins. They're both my cousin, if that makes sense. But speaking to them about my relationship with my partner, which very similar dynamic to their marriage. Wow, saying that is so insane. But having that same dynamic and just getting that older perspective is really helpful. But my cousins and my cousin-in-law are right up under that, and then under them would be my siblings. Like those, 6 people? 2, 4, 6. Those 6 people know the most about me, and then under them would probably be my parents. But understanding that just because you're in a relationship with someone, or just because you have a stronger relationship with someone, doesn't mean you have to share every single individual detail with them. Now, obviously, that's up to each person's interpretation and preference, but I just feel that there are certain things that you can keep to yourself, and that is okay. Every person can have secrets. It's just whether or not it's a safe secret. That is the thing that makes or breaks the boundary. This is another thing I've come to terms with as well when it comes to boundaries and establishing them with friendships or just people in general. I have, in the past, let me think, I'm a junior in college now, and thinking back to my freshman year of college to now, I think I've lost about 5 friendships that I would consider pretty important to me. But when I think about why I'm no longer friends with these people, it all comes down to there being a specific breach of a boundary that either I didn't realize I had until the moment, or that they just miscommunicated their perception of what our friendship was going to look like and their expectation of how much they felt I should commit to the friendship. And I feel like a lot of people have this unspoken rule where when you first meet someone and you get to know things about them and you're getting to know them and there's just so much information to learn about them. You have access to them 24/7 and they are your best friend and you are theirs, and there is no denying that. And I think that the term best friend I've learned to use very lightly, especially within the past few years, but also just in general, there's no one person who knows everything about me other than myself. I consider myself a person with one best friend, multiple close friends, and a partner. That's pretty much it. And then there's people I know, there's acquaintances, there's classmates, there's people I talk to, people I work with, co-workers, things like that. So understanding that taking back space when someone crosses a boundary is okay. And sometimes you don't necessarily owe that person an explanation, especially if they disrespected you or they made you feel that how you interpreted their quote in quotes disrespect was wrong. But sometimes it is worth taking that reflection and thinking about it after the fact. And for someone who thinks a lot and overthinks and over prepares and just is constantly racked and riddled with thoughts from the past and just reflections, I often find myself sitting and thinking about the people who are no longer in my life, and I go, why are these people no longer in my life? What caused them to no longer be here? Is it a natural thing? Was it a physical thing? Was it a relationship thing? Was it a boundary thing? Was it just a time and place? And even learning that there are specific people in your life for specific reasons and specific seasons. Sometimes people come back. Sometimes people are returning characters. And other times, some people go off screen and you never see them again. And they're simply just someone who was there in season 2 and they're not there in season 10. But learning to not take these things so personal, but also understand why there was that loss is definitely something worth thinking about, but not worth dwelling on. Because they're not in your life anymore for a reason, and they could have grown as a person, and you could have grown as a person. But if neither of you all are in contact and they're not trying in any way to reconnect, then you don't owe them that. This is an aside, but I hope that you heal from the things you never talk about. I want you to be able to walk around mentally unburdened with the things that may have tampered you down in the past, but now moving forward, you're able to heal and process and just be. Food for thought. Thank you for spending your time listening to this conversation and engaging with topics you might not have verbalized before. As always, thank you for your time, dedication, and reflection on these topics. Stay safe, stay healthy, and remember, this is a word to us. Share it when you feel ready. Peace, Kyla-Journey.